Thanks for the introduction. Happy to be here. I started out as a high school teacher in Mexico, so we share that in common. I'm going to talk to you today, and I just am very informal, so please ask any questions as they arise, about the second half of my title, I'm a Latin American historian and a digital humanist. Clear definitions of that are hard to come by, but it's pretty much making of it as we go. I think the broadest definition is simply the use of technology to mine data, to bring out new interpretations. But the new technologies of digitization, especially newspapers and other documents, online archives, have made all of my books and projects possible. So the work that I've done in the last 10 years, 15 years ago, would have been simply impossible without an army of researchers and infinite travel budget to go to all the sites that are now digitized. So to give back a little bit to the people who started this, I've been part of an initiative for the past almost 15 years now. First called the Ecclesiastical and Secular Sources in Slave Societies. That was a little unwieldy, so now it's known as the Slave Societies Digital Archive. So I'm going to talk about what it is we're doing, some of the differences in racial systems and slave systems between especially the U.S. and Latin America. Most of you probably know already that 95% of the forced African migrants came to Latin America. Fewer than 5% came to the United States. So when we teach about race and slavery and abolition and emancipation in the U.S., it's good for us to keep that in mind. The idea of American exceptionalism and how that confronts issues of race, slavery, and nationalism in places like Cuba and Brazil. It's mind-bending to realize that in the island of Cuba, roughly the size of Pennsylvania, they imported twice as many slaves as the entirety of the United States. You can see that from one island. Brazil alone imported over 40% of all of the slaves that were brought mainly from West Africa, but also from places like Angola and Mozambique. Okay, so I'm very image-based, so there'll be a lot of images in the presentation. This is one of the churches in Cuba where we work. This grant that I've been doing the last 2 years in particular is funded by the British Library. It's funded by I think the family that the movie Girl on the Dragon Tattoo was based on. Swedish or Norwegian. And they fund projects like this all over the world. But the goal is to go into places because of warfare, because of climactic issues, because of endemic poverty, they're unable to take care of these documents and collections. We train local people to digitize the records and put them online. This is the condition of the grant. They have to be freely available to anyone with an internet connection, which is of course difficult in places like Cuba and northern Brazil. But broadly speaking, the purpose of doing this is the democratization of access to history, broadening of availability of documents to people who do not have PhDs and travel budgets to go to these sites and work. The hope is, in the grandiose scheme of things, that it will bring in new voices to writing of history, that it will bring in new critical voices, and by expanding the field of available inputs, perspectives, that will arrive at better history, better literature, and more democratic accounts of this confliction of the past. So this is the sort of record that we're largely dealing with. Cuban governmental sources are largely closed off to us because that's how they keep the archive open. It's by charging researchers, especially American researchers, outlandish sums to copy any of the documents. So unless you have 4 or 5 months to be down there, half of your budget to travel to Cuba for historical research generally goes to paying them to photograph documents. So we partnered with the Catholic Church and explained why that is, why the Catholic Church is the custodian of the largest set of serial documents pertinent to the African diaspora in the world, bar none. Cuban historians, U.S. historians, Brazilian historians have only just started to scratch the surface of what's in these documents. Unlike in the United States, and we'll get into this a little more deeply, the topic of the humanity of the enslaved came up in terms of the 1815 census. Based on Roman law, based on Spanish law from the 13th century, slaves were granted juridical personhood. They were legally people. They were encouraged to marry, take the sacraments, leave behind records that you can trace genealogies back to the 16th, 15th, 14th century. That kind of genealogical documents and data simply isn't available to most African Americans, most descendants of slaves. in the U.S. We'll explain why that is. It wasn't just happenstance. It was philosophical, legal, cultural, especially religious differences that granted the enslaved certain rights, certain protections, unlike in the United States. So the church, as an independent organization, has a long history of conflict with the Cuban Revolution. They have agreed in recent years to kind of live and let live. Each time a pope visits the island, the Catholic Church gets new rights to celebrate Mass in public, for example, if a priest wear the actual priestly garb, and women as well. But in every church on the island, and there are hundreds and thousands of churches, there are documents that, outside of the small town, are unknown. Some of them going back to the 15th century, some of them going back to medieval Spain, in terms of tracing your genealogy back and proving that you have clean blood to be able to marry someone in the Cuban context. So part of the project, seed money, was my brother and I, who's a geographer at the University of Alabama, just rented an old Peugeot car. We took off around the island for about a month and a half, knocking on doors with a letter from the Archbishop that gave us carte blanche to enter all of these sites, and just figuring out what was there. And a lot of the narratives that we uncovered, if they took place in the American context, they would be the fodder for 10 Steven Spielberg movies. So everyone knows the case of the Amistad. The ship the Amistad, we made a movie about in the 1840s. We have 10, 15, 20 cases that are similar to that are larger numbers of individuals that are documented, but we don't pay attention to them because, as Americans, we tend to navel gaze. We tend to be exceptionalists. So hopefully part of the work is to broaden the dialogue and the understanding of slavery in the United States, especially the post-slave, post-emancipation period. So there's been a fertile debate for years among historians of Latin America and the U.S. How do we explain why in Brazil or Cuba there was no iteration of the Ku Klux Klan? Why was there no legalized Jim Crow?
One of my professors, Dr. Moreno, stated that the reason why American societies are like the way they are is because the church agreed with other cultural and social representatives that legitimization of heirs was important. And with all this intermixing of different races, Native Americans, Peninsulares, and also African slaves, all this intermixing going on, it was not just crucial to note the racial caste system, but it was also crucial to be able to say, yeah, even though he comes from this kind of lineage, he is legitimate heir of this and that. So that's what allowed for a lot of that's why the Catholic Church taken such a great interest in that. It's because it's part of that whole, keeping things out of wedlock.
Partially, but it was also a philosophical difference.
Right.
It was also the tradition of Roman law transmitted through the church that saw the enslaved as members of society. There were much older slave systems. The British slave system really existed in tandem with capitalism. So this is an important difference in the two. I'm going to play a brief video. I'm going to do a little voiceover. It's in Spanish from the Associated Press, but it gives you kind of a visual sense of what it is that we're doing.
En este edificio de la vieja Habana se encuentran miles de documentos que revelan partes de la historia de la esclavitud en Cuba. Un equipo de académicos estadounidenses, con la ayuda del gobierno cubano, trabajan para conservar archivos que documentan el comercio de esclavos y su vínculo con Estados Unidos. Esto es un desafío porque los académicos luchan contra el tiempo y los elementos, ya que los libros están pobremente almacenados. No se sabe cuántos documentos ya se han perdido en tormentas, o han sido robados durante ataques de piratas, o han sido destruidos durante guerras o revueltas. Casi 2 millones de documentos serán digitalizados como parte del proyecto que se realizará en 4 ciudades y concluirá en 2018.
So we can hear his voice. This is the sacristan of the church, Felix. He makes probably about $25 a month, tops. He will not accept any money from us to do this work, even though we generally pay people 2 or 3 times the going salary, because it means that much to them.
La Iglesia se convierte en una depositaria de parte de esta historia, ya que sus responsables eran minuciosos documentalistas que registraban todo tipo de transacciones y sucesos de la vida diaria. David LaFevor es un profesor de historia en la Universidad de Texas en Arlington. Él colabora en el proyecto de la conservación de estos documentos.
Al ir a una iglesia, no sabes lo que vas a encontrar. Tienes una idea general de los documentos originales, encuentras registros de terrenos, registros de hospitales, encuentras cartas que tienen que ver con la vida diaria del sobreviviente, encuentras documentos que no imaginarías poder encontrar en Cuba.
La esclavitud fue abolida en Cuba en 1886 y esclavistas estadounidenses usaron la isla como punto de transporte para los esclavos que eran transportados al sur de Estados Unidos, así que la digitalización de estos documentos es sumamente valiosa para la preservación de la historia de la comunidad afrocubana, la cual no está bien documentada en la isla. Dr. Ramirez, Associated Press.
So this is the challenge. This is one library in the city of Santiago de Cuba, and so we take one picture of every page at a time. And so in this library alone, and there's quite a bit behind me, there are probably 1.5, 2 million documents. Each document, each page that we're taking, these are generally registers of baptisms, of marriages, of confirmations, of deaths, of hospitals, of sickness. They all allow you to create social networks to figure out how these social networks drove daily life, ideas of meaning, religious syncretism, so African religions being fought by the Catholic Church. These are some of the only sources that we have to understand the nature of Cuban spirituality and religion. So all of these have to be, as I said, photographed one page at a time, and so it's a very painstaking process. There are probably 10 or 15 libraries this size on the island.
Do you have to purchase the internet hourly cards like Bitcoin people do?
We don't use internet in this, so this is one of the challenges. Projects that are run like this in Brazil or in Colombia that have internet connections, they can actually send documents over the internet. But in order to send one photograph at 24 megabytes over Cuban internet, which is basically dial-up, it would take about an hour, and that's $1. That's $1. Internet in Cuba used to be up to $12 an hour. Now it's down to 1, so it's a little more reasonable at this point. This is another one of the challenges that has become more difficult given political changes in the past 2 to 3 years. So it's technically illegal for us to continue doing this work. If we, for example, rent a car in Cuba, it is now illegal. If we stay in a hotel in Cuba, that is illegal without special dispensation from the government. We'll get into that in Q&A if you like. So the background, I got involved in this project very early in my graduate career. I started in 2004. I had this very strange fellowship the year before called the Watson Fellowship, funded by Thomas Watson. And basically, the year you graduate college, it gives you a lump sum of money and says, travel around the world for a year and do something bizarre. So I traveled around and was a prize fighter, a boxer, and figured out pretty soon that there wasn't an old-timers day for boxers. So I chose to go back into school. So 2004, 2005, my mentor at that book, Jane Landers, if you haven't read her work, I highly recommend it. She's incredible. Begins this project, and at that point, digital technology was very, very basic, so we were there with 4 or 5 megapixel cameras. 10 years before that, she had been doing the same work with microfilm. So trying to develop microfilm in the bathroom at night, red light bulb in Cuba. We ended up losing a lot of the images, and one of the challenges that we have in doing this work is sometimes as you're documenting, you're destroying this. So it's kind of the archaeologist's dilemma. How much do we leave intact, hoping that in the future a better technology to do this work will arrive, but if we leave it, it will likely disappear. So hundreds of thousands of images that we've taken of documents in Chocó, Colombia, for example, those originals are already gone. So person broke into one warehouse, it caught on fire, the roof collapsed under rain. So the areas that we're working in are always risk groups. One of these projects, probably one of the best known ones, was in Timbuktu, in West Africa. And they got in there the year before Islamic extremists destroyed a lot of the documents. The richest documentary sources we have in the West African society. So the work is very tiny. As I said earlier, the original acronym was Ecclesiastical and Secular Sources in Slave Societies, but it's a mouthful to say. So we've changed it now to the Slave Society's Digital Archive. So why Cuba? The systematic study of Latin America.
Since you brought up the issue of Africa, you have to know if there are any other efforts like yours or largest for the other African countries, since I visited Ghana and took people to the archives that they're really following up.
There is one in Ghana right now. So there are, if you go to the British, it's called the British Library and Digital Archives program. Anyone can apply for these grants. So up to $200,000 for 2 years, and there are seed grants that are $10,000. That will allow you to go into a place where your scene documents or your no conditions are perilous and write a report, and hopefully get the full amount to do these sorts of projects. Why Cuba in particular? It has a couple of superlatives. 1959 really starts the systematic study of Latin American history in the U.S. You want to imagine for what reason? We figured out he has some ideas that are appealing to very poor people. He has an effective way of blaming Western democratic capitalism for a lot of the inequities in Cuba. And if that idea spreads as a contagion in Latin America, you're in trouble. So along with the Peace Corps, along with the Alliance for Progress, all of these programs that are designed to not only help people, but in a sense to inoculate against the temptations to join the Soviet world. Nicaragua, Chile, we go down that rabbit hole at this point. Precarious state of preservation and dissemination. In general, these societies, people are more involved with figuring out where their next meal is going to come from or getting through the daily travails of life. There's not enough fat on the land, in a sense, to value these sorts of documents in the way that we do, with the relative luxury of studying history, being interested in mental functions beyond the day-to-day. So this is true in parts of Brazil where we work and in parts of Colombia as well. There's a lot of suspicion about Americans, particularly in Cuba. So it's painstaking not only to get in and do this work, but to get the permissions. In one case, I found out that a bishop was a huge fan of Barbra Streisand, so I bought him a box set. And after 2 days of negotiations, including cigars and rum, he said to me, it's still a no. I'm still not going to let you do it, but it's not an eternal no. You can come back and bring more Barbra Streisand. So permission to work in these documents. So that's part of the challenge, and it's also, to be honest, part of the fun. Because it's learning the culture, learning negotiations, all of those things are included in this. But because the average salary for Cuba is between $20 and $30, there's obviously not a lot of money to buy acid-free paper and folders and things that would be necessary to store these documents. Even though they're the largest grouping of papers on the African diaspora in the world. So how are these Catholic Church documents different in Latin America? As we mentioned, the Church saw it as its mission to save souls, but also to document people's lives because they were viewed as people who had the unfortunate condition of being slaves. It was hereditary in the system, yes, but it was also a heck of a lot easier to gain your freedom. There were systems of manumission that made it relatively easy compared to the U.S. to become free. If your owner beat you too severely or mistreated you even emotionally, you could appeal to a judge. And a judge could intervene and set the price for your own purchase. If you worked on Saturdays, for example, when you had your day off and you got a little bit of money, you could put a down payment on your own freedom called system de cooptation, and the more you paid, the more free you get. So by the time you paid 40% of your value established by a judge, you could go out and live on your own. If you were married, it was highly unlikely that a judge or an order could separate you from your spouse. They could not sell your children away from you. All of these things were not the case in the United States. It's wrong to, I think, argue and too simplistic that one slave system was better or worse than another one. All slave systems are by definition bad. But we have argued for generations as historians that these qualitative differences made it easier to become free and establish patterns of freedom. So this really contributes to one of the fundamental differences between Latin American race relations and the United States. Racism certainly exists in Latin America, but again, why was there not the KKK? At the point of final emancipation in Brazil, 1888, 1886, roughly half of the population of color had already been free. Some of them have been free for generations. Some of them work in professions. They have experience doing the day-to-day things that you have to as a responsible individual. They haven't been prohibited that degree of responsibility. So this is just really the genesis point to look into how our racial systems evolve quite starkly different. So what are these documents and what are we getting from them? What can they tell us about the lives of African-descended people, Chinese people, indigenous people, that we simply can't scratch the surface of in the same way in the United States? First of all of these books were divided by race. So there was one set of books for libros españoles, basically white people, and a book for everyone else. And it depends on where you are as to how they title this. So they're often libros de pardos y morenos, so books of brown and black people. There are libros de mulatto people, obviously. There are libros de indios, books of Indians. So in the early part of the colonial period, these were native Cuban indigenous people. They were killed off and died of suicide, disease, relatively quickly. And then a new wave of books of Indians come about the 1820s and the 1830s. When the slave trade is becoming more and more difficult because the British are policing it. And so they start importing Indians from Mexico, from southern Mexico in particular, from Yucatan, but also Yaqui Indians from northern Mexico, from Sonora. There are books of Chinos, which is the generic term for anyone who looks kind of Asian. Why were there so many Chinos who arrived in Cuba in the 1840s? It becomes the largest Chinatown holding a place in the hemisphere. Why are they importing Chinos? Slaves are becoming more expensive. The British have destabilized pretty much everything in China, and so there's a huge diaspora of Chinese laborers. So if you go to Havana to this day, it's got a massive Chinatown in the middle of the city. So these are ecclesiastical records, so by definition they're sacred. This is another reason that they have remained over the last 300 or 400 years, because the people who are the custodians of these documents often see it as a sacred obligation to protect them, kind of the key masters. In that sense. So baptisms. So what information can we glean from baptismal records? As I said, the books are divided between people of color, basically, and everyone else. So has your mother, obviously. If you were married, if you were legitimate, had your father, had your grandparents in there, had your godparents. Why are godparents important for historians? What does that tell us? Social prestige. It tells us about ethnicities. So one of the most fascinating part of these documents is that Cubans kind of reinvented African ethnicities largely based on linguistic lines. So you can trace where in Africa people have come from. If they were recently imported, were called Rosales, which basically meant they didn't speak much Spanish. Their language would be noted. Their godparents' ethnicity would be noted. And so you can recreate these networks that we simply can't do in the United States. Another key difference, and this is why if you go to Cuba or Brazil, so you go to Bahia in Brazil, or you go to pretty much any city in Cuba, you see people who are all dressed in white, for example, and they wear beads around their necks. They're santeros, or abacuá, or candomblé. These are African religions that are syncretized with Catholicism in this case. Why don't we have those sorts of clear manifestations of African ethnicity in the United States? Is it allowed? It was certainly frowned upon. Okay, so there's another level of deculturalization by moving them around. What percentage of African American slaves in 1860 had been born in Africa? Almost none. In Cuba and Brazil, the slave trade continued in the 1860s. In Cuba and Brazil, roughly 500,000 slaves were imported between 1820 and 1867. So they had a constant replenishing of African ethnic identity. These sodalities, these ethnic identities were encouraged by the Catholic Church. Africans were allowed to organize along ethnic lines and have clubs for venerations to certain saints. They were allowed to, as we'll see in the picture, on saints' days and on religious holidays, dance in the streets, wearing African costumes, playing African drums. African languages are preserved. There's a wonderful documentary that I highly recommend called They Are We. This is by an Australian anthropologist who who was doing field work in Matanzas, in the middle of Cuba, one of the biggest sugarcane growing areas. And she heard a woman singing a song in a West African dialect. She could understand some words, could fix it. And the woman who was singing the song didn't know what she was singing, didn't know what the words meant, didn't know where it came from. This woman records this singing and takes it to West Africa, and for 2 years travels kind of the backwaters of the interior of West Africa playing it. People say, kind of sounds familiar, until she found one village where they understood all of the words in the song. It turned out that it was a healing song passed down through women in one family. And so they were able to reunite these families in West Africa based on that song. So those are stories that, when we start doing more research on places like Cuba, when they have the relative luxury to naval gaze that we do and write our own history, these are going to become a dime a dozen stories like this. Confirmations, recognition of legitimacy. So these are some of the more interesting documents. Why would these come about? Recognition of legitimacy.
Like I mentioned earlier, Dr. Ramos, he say that it's important in Spanish culture that you had heirs for your family, so that way the church took on that responsibility of ensuring that you had an heir, even if it was in a racial relationship, that was still a legitimate heir. It was important to keep heirs from being, pardon the French, bastardized because they were born out of wedlock.
Having been born out of wedlock would automatically lower your social status in Latin America, here too, in the US. But a lot of them were out of conscience. Guys on their deathbeds saying, I'm finally going to admit that I'm the father of this child, this mulatto child who's the son of my slave who happens to live with me. So these are kind of cleansing my soul documents. People often go very much into detail, in some cases, of how the conception took place, what they were doing, when we were out for a drive in the countryside, and the urges overcame. So you have that kind of intimate information often in documents like this that you rarely see in other sorts of historical records. Marriage records. So these are also packed with information, social information. You had to prove often what was called limpieza de sangre. In Spain, medieval Spain, you believe that you didn't have the tint of Moorish, Muslim, or Jewish blood, but in the New World it became more of a racialized issue. So you have to prove 6 generations back, 7 generations back, my family has been blue bloods. Where does that term come from? You're blue blood. You're white enough to see the blue veins in your arm. You had to prove that after the 1790s to legally marry someone. So this creates kind of a genealogy of documentation that sometimes stretches back into the 13th, 14th century in Spain. So with all of these serial documents, using digital tools now, and aggregating them, looking at provenance, for example, we can, for the first time in history, get a rough understanding of where people are coming from, where they wind up in Cuba, how languages change over time, blood chronology, all of these new tools. Death and burial records. So often, this contains very detailed medical information on individuals, demographic information as well. Because the churches are often the strongest buildings in town, they become the repository for all other sorts of documents that people want to protect. So libros de actas, this is the day-to-day functioning of the church, which may sound very bureaucratic and boring, but it's often priests talking to each other about how we can exterminate these Afro-Cuban religions. Should we bring so-and-so up for the Inquisition because he's guilty of doing this? I actually saw the woman riding a broomstick and having sex with the devil. Priests are saying this to each other. Land records, so purchases of land over time. Hospital records, also fascinating in terms of the history of medicine, being able to figure out medical practices, interventions against disease, all of these fascinating topics. Orphanage records, so tons and tons and tons of children born out of wedlock because marriage was not free. So there was a higher level of illegitimacy among people of color simply because they couldn't often afford to pay for weddings. So again, while we say the Catholic Church encouraged this, they also charged for it. So de facto and de jure, it's not just institutional differences that account for most of this. Inquisition records. So these are some of the most fascinating. They're well used by historians. Most of them are and central repositories in places like Mexico City or Spain, but there's some records that remained in these provincial areas. And these are fascinating. So, you know how the Inquisition worked? It wasn't the assumption of innocence. They basically brought you in and said, you've been accused of something, we're not going to tell you what. Unload your conscience on everything you've ever done in your entire life that's wrong, that's bad. So it's like the scene in Goonies, right, where they're putting Chuck's hand in the blender. And he starts, when I was 7 years old, I threw a vomit in the movie theater. And so you have people basically give their entire life stories of everything that they've ever done wrong. These are fascinating little mini biographies, each of which merits its own treatment, its own study. This is level of moderate deterioration from the documents that we're working on. So these are worm-eaten, there's water damage, we call them bolillos, these are bug-eating insects. There's no really insecticides there, and the ones that are, I'd be afraid of DDT within them. And so they put cloves on the books, for example. This is supposed to be kind of a homeopathic anti-insect. But this is a book from 1745, and often there are books from the 15th, 16th century. One of the worst, almost gave me a heart attack. I was in Santiago, and they had a brother-in-law of the archivist who was taking care of the books the day that I went there. He was upset, the archivist. And the guy said, oh, yeah, this stuff is really fragile. It's in the back condition. It's all, He picks up the book by the spine and starts shaking. And it just disintegrates. And it was a book of marriage records from the 1650s. That's the kind of stuff that you come across. So in the last couple of years, I've been able to, through the grant money that the British and the PTA has provided, take groups of graduate students down to do the work. So these are some of our PhD students in what is the oldest standing church in Cuba. And this was a church that was built by free people of color with the money that they made working in the port, doing things like carrying sugar loads and loading them onto ships. Kind of a funny story about this. Prince Charles and Camilla, over there, just made a visit down to Cuba. I was contacted about 6 months ago by the British ambassador in Cuba and said, would you be willing to guide a VIP and show them this project because the British are involved in it? And I said, yeah, I can do that. The dean here graciously offered to pay for me to go down and do that. It looked good on the website, I think. And about 3 days before I was supposed to leave, I got a call from the ambassador, and she said, well, the city historian, a guy named Eusebio Leal, has a lot of power within the Cuban government because he's making Old Havana touristic to attract people with money. Said he doesn't want to take the oils to this particular church where your project is based because he didn't tell me the reason why, but the reason is because it's an unreconstructed part of the city, and so the Potemkin village would fall before the oils, and didn't want them to see that. It would be nice to meet the future king of Poland, but there's not to. So how does this work? In Cuba, as everything, it's more complex. So if we go to a local university and we ask students to work with us, chances are we're going to have some informants that are there. And if they are students who are legitimately interested, they're probably going to fall under suspicion for working with foreigners. One of the only reasons that I haven't been ejected from Cuba, I was reported once, was because this money comes from the British. It came from the U.S. government. They probably would not let me do any of this because of suspected subversion. In most places, these pictures, for example, are in Quito, the poorest and most Afro-descendant part of Colombia, on the west coast. It's also one of the rainiest spots on Earth. So these are students from the local university that we trained, and they were very industrious and digitized almost 400,000 documents for us in the space of 2 years. We were able to pay them 3 times the going wage. The British allowed for that. And this is the site that I mentioned earlier where a lot of the documents are now destroyed. So we would have lost 300-400 years of the city of Quito's history had not been digitized by these students. It also gives them an opportunity to gain some expertise in these records. And not a few of them have come to the United States to pursue graduate programs and publish articles and become professionals in historical and preservation fields. In places like Quito, it's very difficult for internet access, not as bad as Cuba, but that is a constant fight that we're waging, and it necessitates nearly constant travel back and forth to carry artifacts, which of course is inherently unstable, and so this is still pretty tenuous work even at this point. So what are the overall goals? Preservation and creation of new knowledge, and that's what historians like to tell ourselves that we're doing, is creating knowledge. Democratization of access. So Brazil, for example, huge country, bigger than the continent of the United States, minus Alaska. Afro-Brazilian students working in the Northeast. Brazil's kind of a mirror image of the United States. The Northeast is very Afro-descended, the South is very European descended in general. Simply don't have the money to travel 4 or 5 times over and look into these documents to write about what they perceive to be their own history. So by putting on the internet, most of them have internet at home, they're able to work on these ideas and work on these documents. Creation of international networks, as I mentioned earlier, scholarly and in terms of friendship, and the ultimate goal is simply better global and local histories. All of you know at this moment, this very moment, we have more access to more knowledge than any book we use at our fingertips. The question is whether that's going to create better histories or not. I think that's yet to be determined. There's always the risk of informational overload, and there's also, in my own work, there's always a risk of cherry picking. So if I have 5 million newspapers at my fingertips, and I want to look for a trend, I can find it pretty easily by doing a word search. So you create realities for yourself in that way. So kind of the negative side of technology. This is a map that shows roughly our route in Cuba. This is a couple years old at this point, so we've fanned out in all different directions. But we did a rough calculation based on how many we've been able to do in the past 3 years, and working at this rate, it would take us approximately 600 years to digitize all of the documents. So we're in need of bodies, we're in need of people who can manage cameras. Very difficult to conduct this work in Cuba for several reasons that we'll talk about employing Cubans to do this work. Some ways of visualizing the information. My brother is in charge of all research of graphics, the geographer. So these are collections of documents in various places, just trying to get a handle on quantities and on what exists. We simply don't know at this point, the vast majority. Sometimes you get there and it's too late. Quite often it's too late. So this says, it's wrapped in paper, and it says, libro mal estado, no se abre. The book is too poor a state to be made. So that book itself is the only proof of life for probably 3,000 individuals from the 18th century. And simply gone. This is the general state of documents that we find. So this is in the oldest city in Cuba. Columbus talks about these beautiful hills behind it, Baracoa, and a place like that is constantly ravaged by hurricanes almost every year. It's a miracle that these documents survive, but they only have documents going back in this case to the 1650s, even though the town was founded in 1512. So this is the format of what we create. We refine it a little bit from this point. We have non-reflective backgrounds, we have smaller rulers and color checkers, but this is what the Pearson Library wants in terms of format. So you can imagine when you have paper in this condition, you have to be extremely careful with it and measure very, very slowly. So a good worker with this sort of book could do maybe half a book in an entire day. So this is the time scale that we're talking about. So some results and future plans, and this is a little bit dated. So now we have, depending on the calculation, 15 to 20 million pages that need to be done. These are all unique documents, and as I said, each document can contain information on 6 or 7 people. So we're looking at the life stories and records of millions and millions of people. Again, we have no copy for in the United States. Expanding the provincial and local archives. This one is going to be very, very difficult unless the politics between the U.S. and Cuba change dramatically in the coming years. I'm not optimistic. Working with Cuban state archives. So this was a pipe dream that I had a while ago. Recently, in January, I've been working in the National Archives, and I brought this up, and she laughed at me. She said, "We have to close our doors if we do this." Took out the only revenue stream that we have, we would have to no longer exist. We've conducted workshops in all of these cities at this point. But as I said earlier, in Cuba, it's really cool because everything is always very complicated. Work culture is very, very different. So if you have a state job in Cuba, most people work in DSC and DMO. You work one day and rest. you're not really incentivized to work very hard in most cases because it doesn't affect the pay that you're going to get. It doesn't affect the longevity of your job. And people don't really see, many people don't see the state as very legitimate. So it's created a work culture that is hard to sort of reverse. And so I've had to learn to very much moderate my expectations in terms of productivity. In January, I went to a site in the town of Remedios, and I had a woman there who said she was going to work very, very hard and gave her the going rate. And in 6 months, she digitized exactly 3 books. But because we had a contract, I still had to pay her the full agreed salary in order to do this. And when I tried to talk to one of my teammates down there, he said, "Yeah, don't even bring it up. You're being imperialist, and I won't work with you." So you have to negotiate issues like that at every turn. So funding, where does this money come from? This British grant has built in a model, so other countries are now expanding. So the British grant from the Endangered Archives is supposed to go to societies that they define as pre-industrial or pre-modern. And as you know, you can pretty much argue any society until the 19th century on either side of that, depending on what you're looking at. So most of the documents that we're doing, the vast majority of them from the 19th century, when most of West Africans were imported into Cuba. There are also grants from the federal government, but most of these grants can't be used in Cuba. So the American Council of Learned Societies has a digital grant, and NEH also has a digital humanities grant. It can actually be used in Cuba. I've applied for that 4 times now and never gotten it. I think about 7% of people get it. So that's what you have to do. I'm going to pause briefly. Any questions about what we've talked about so far? Okay, I'm going to briefly go into the talk that I gave yesterday. What kind of stories can we tell based on these documents? 1863, October, West Africa, the port of Lida, the second largest slave port in the history of slavery. The last slave ship leaves it. It's a steamship. There are almost 1,500 Africans from various parts of West Africa on the ship. It makes a transatlantic voyage after being chased by the British, but the slavers in Cuba made so much money that they bought better technology than the British. They couldn't catch them. So they arrive in Cuba off of a place you may have heard of called the Bay of Pigs. And over the course of 8 hours, they unload the 1,350 Africans that remain. Men, women, and children with an average age of 12, 13, all completely naked. Slaving was illegal. Spain had signed on to treaties with the British, and after 1820, technically any newly imported African was a contraband and could be revoked. But the economic incentives of slavery subverted all sorts of attempts to go on board. There was simply too much money to be made. This one shipment of Africans was worth the equivalent in today's dollars of about $30 to $35 million. So you can imagine Cuba is still a colony at this point. The people who are administering are largely there to make money, have no filial ties to Cuba, and so the slave trade actually increases after it is declared illegal, despite the attempts by the British to exterminate it. So because these slaves are illegal, they are forced marched inland through the malarial wastes of the Zapata swamp, which is what the U.S.-backed invaders countered as well in the 1960s when the pigs happened. And they are found by a local governor named Jose Agustin Arguelles. He fakes the death of 141 of them, fakes their burning, and sells them off to local plantation owners. He then sends the remaining 1,000 or so to Havana, where they are officially free and become slaves of the state. It's actually worse to be a slave of the state than it is to be a slave of the private owner. Because as a slave of the state, you can't appeal for your rights at all. You can't say that you're being mistreated. You can't have your marriage respected. You can't have your children not separated from you. And so life gets worse for these people. Arguelles then, knowing that it will be discovered what he's done, flees to the United States. He goes to New York and gets a luxury hotel room in Bowery. Abraham Lincoln soon finds out about this from secret communications from the governor of Cuba. There was no extradition treaty with Spain. Generally, it's illegal to extradite people without a treaty. It's called illegal rendition, or extraordinary rendition. So Lincoln dispatches federal marshals illegally to kidnap this guy. Kidnaps him, takes him to the harbor, but he knew that the police would be fast on his trail, the New York police, and so he sent a decoy out and then put the guy in a rowboat, rowed him around the harbor where he was loaded onto a mail steamer and sent back to Cuba for trial. So in 1864, the Democrats got hold of this, and a lot of Republicans tried to impeach Lincoln for this. It was a violation of U.S. policy and usurpation of power, along with silencing some of the press, and establishing habeas corpus in places like Tennessee, that almost caused him to lose his second election, among a number of reasons. But what happened to the 1,000 people in Cuba? That's where these documents come. Being able to trace them, being able to tell their life story. So through church documents and baptismal registers, and marriage registers, I was able to move into the present and find the descendants of people who've been on this ship. So I took a trip to one of the former plantations.
You don't think you're in a connection with
This is the Ingenio, the sugar engine and the sugar factory where it was converted into consumable sugar. The vast majority of this plant in the 1860s was exported to the United States. Now the majority of it goes to China and North Korea. But the people who were descended from this ship are still living in this town. They took the name of the slave trader, the largest slave trader in human history, Cuban boss by the name of Julian Zulueta. Most of them are named Zulueta y Zulueta. So they're doubly endowed with the inheritance of the slavery. Found one woman in particular. Her name was LaFevor. She's about 80 years old, retired school teacher, who had for the last 10 years or so of her career saved a lot of her money in order to open a small museum to African ethnicity in this tiny town in the middle of nowhere. I've been trying for years to trace the life of Zulueta because he was a contrabandist. He didn't leave around a lot of documents tracing him. His descendants in Spain, who are still fairly wealthy, don't really want to talk about the provenance of their fortunes and the companies that he created in Spain, along with some of those owned by the Queen, based on slave labor in Cuba. So this woman told me that she could explain the death of Zulueta. I knew from documents that he had died falling off a horse in the 1870s, and she took me next door to her neighbor's house, a guy named Enrique, who was a Babala, a priest in the Santeria religion. And he explained that his shrine was to an African deity named Ogun, who was the god of iron and warfare, and that Ogun, in order to take revenge on the largest slave trader in history, had infected the horse through the horseshoe and caused him to throw the rider Zulueta and kick him in the head and kill him. So how do you include that in the historical narrative? I'm still trying to figure out the afterward material. But we still have that sort of first-person narrative of causation in the past in all of these places that are still running, that are still producing sugar. Most of these companies were in the 1910s bought by United Fruit and other American companies, where they recreated Jim Crow-style living conditions in places like this. So there are still women, this one in particular, she says, yeah, I remember when United Fruit came, just like in 100 Years of Solitude, we got from Garcia Marquez, they built two towns essentially full of workers, the black workers in one town, the white workers in another, YMCA and the swimming pool, and tried to create an American suburb. So all of these places with the documents that tell the story of microcosms of these larger international processes that are fascinating not only from an aggregate but from an individual humanistic level. And these are the kind of stories that these documents allow us to tell. So visual, this is the route of that ship. When the slave trade finally ends, Cubans still need a lot of labor, so the ship and then goes to China and forces coolies to labor under basically slave-like conditions. So the biography of this ship is fascinating. Every once in a while you find a rotten priest, believe it or not. This was a priest from that town who was complicit in the illegal importation of these slaves. So he stayed up one night knowing that he would likely be caught and faked an entire death and birth register to try and cover his tracks from selling these Africans off illegally. And so without context, walking into the church and reading this book, we just say, this is a legitimate document, record of these people. The challenge, again, is finding where these 1,000 people were dispersed and often going to towns and informing people of life stories that they had no clue of. One of the areas that we found pertains to Florida. So what happened to the Cubans and the Spanish people living in Florida after 1819? They took all of the Afro-Cubans who understandably wanted to live in the Spanish Empire and not in the United States, because of slavery. And they founded a town in the middle of the province of Matanzas called San Agustin de la Nueva Florida, St. Augustine of the New Florida. The people living in the town had no idea of the system. They thought they had come from descendants of the Canary Island. So going in and being able to bring that information, pretty thrilling in terms of the nerd buzz story. So this is an image of the descendants, some of the descendants from that very slave ship. Through these documents, we were able to trace back to this village, and they're dancing in front of the slave quarters that were built in the 1850s by Julian Zurleta, who fancied himself a benevolent slave owner, but had a penchant for beating slaves to death in cages with castles. Narratives like that. Any questions at this point before I move on to some tools? Need a break? Everybody good? Okay. You want to go break?
Zurleta, the name of this community,
There is a street called Zurleta. It's named after him. He later became the mayor of Atlanta. Let's take 5 minutes and then we'll get started again. Alright, let's go ahead and get started again. It's going to go for about another 30 minutes or so. I think we have a reception at 3:30. Wanted to give you all some of the digital online tools that most of them are freely available that I use for my own research, but I can also be used for teaching very effectively, very efficiently. So one, largest is the U.S. National Archives. So a sizable portion of their collection is digitized and online. So it's keyword searchable, and you can read millions of pages of manuscript documents, some taken from a microfilm, but some digitized more recently, so very, very readable. So in terms of having your students find primary sources, documents, they can search it by interest, they can search it by period, by any of these key terms, and go down the rabbit hole. Court cases, documents about contraband, smuggling, piracy, all of these sources are available free of charge. The British National Archives. So most of the documents that we have that pertain to the slave trade in the 19th century, the slave trade, the long array of it, were kept by the British as an attempt to police the slave trade from around 1807 until the end of the 1860s. Thousands and thousands and thousands of pages are online. So primary documents, letters back and forth, consular documents, descriptions of ships, cases of catching captains at sea who were carrying slaves or had ships who were equipped for slavery. So within these documents, you see all sorts of defenses of these actions. They are wonderful ways to teach the complexity of these questions. One of the methods that I try and use in my class is by simply telling students that we make evil people and boogeymen out of our historical subjects. The learning process stops there, so challenge them to get in the mindset of the slave. How did he sleep just well at night with his actions? What were those philosophical systems that justified what he did? You can start to get at that through a lot of these documents, through a lot of the correspondence. If you are or have students who are Spanish readers, one of the most phenomenal online sources is called PADES, the Portal de Archivos Españoles, so the Spanish archives, which have, of course, information on Texas and Florida. So if you go to PADES, and for example, if you did a simple search, say you want any documents that pertain to Texas, you want digitized files that you can read and download online. So this is just stuff that you can access immediately. These are, so this is coming from the Archivo Histórico Nacional and Archive in Madrid. Many of them will come also from the Provincial Archive of Álava, in the north of Spain, Simanacas, Archivo General de Indias in Seville. So this is the largest archive for the New World by far. So if you just did that search, you wanted to see, well, what's going on in Spanish archives with the keyword Texas. And that's not quite good. So if you open that first tab there, it's secret correspondence about uprisings in Texas, 1841. So it's written, there's a lot of sobre establecimiento de familias comunes en México, a secret confidential file on the establishment of Spanish families in Mexico and Texas. So attempts to take back Texas. So a lot of these documents will have been reviewed by historians, but a lot of them are not. So I'll be the first person seeing this information. Also a great way to interest your students. The idea that a lot of this is simply not discovered yet. We write more books about our own history every year than the rest of the world combined. So there's a lot more out there to know about other places. That's fascinating. So get some other sources. So Chronicling America. This is a Library of Congress site that has millions of digitized newspaper pages that are also searchable by keyword. So any historical topic in the long array of U.S. history, you can have students go and immediately read these primary documents. So one of the ones that I use for my students in U.S. history course is I'll give them 3 or 4 names, unique names. They have to search them. These are often people who have been lynched. So they go and they read these local newspapers from Rome, Georgia, that celebrate the fact that the local hardware store ran out of ammunition because they shot the guy so many times. People celebrate this lynching as an act of popular justice and manliness. So again, ask your students, why are there people standing in the foreground without their faces covered? Appearing very proud of what they've done in newspapers. How do we explain that socially? And again, how do we explain how they self-justify it? All of those ideas that challenge students to look a little bit deeper than just saying that is evil, which it is. It's not complicated. Newspapers.com. This is a pay site. It's fairly cheap. I think it's about $9 a month. It complements Chronicling America, and it's a little bit more manageable. So one of the searches I ask my students to do is for the name Jordan Anderson, Jourdan. Has anyone heard this before? You've heard this? All right. So anyone heard of the Sambo thesis before? Before back in politics. It was obviously discredited idea that African slaves were forcibly infantilized. They were kept in a state of being children. That they were subservient, that they couldn't develop the mental faculties of an adult. So if you wanted to ask a student to challenge that, you would have them search this letter. I want to read it to you just because. So this is from a guy who was enslaved right down the street from our parents in Nashville, place like Big Springs, Tennessee. After the war was over, this guy's master, we don't have the original letter, wrote him up in Ohio where he had gone, a very abolitionist area, and said, "Come on back. I miss you, man. Come back, work for us. It'll be good to you. Let bygones be bygones." And this guy who was forcibly infantilized and didn't have an intellect, obviously, wrote him back this letter. "Sir, I got your letter and was glad to find that you had not forgotten me, Jordan, and that you wanted me to come back and live with you again, promising to do better for me than anybody else can. I have often felt uneasy about you. I thought the Yankees would have hung you before this for harboring rebels they found at your house. I suppose they never heard about you going to Colonel Martin's to kill the Union soldier that was left by his company in their stables. Although you shot at me twice before I left you, I did not want to hear of your behavior, and I'm glad you are still living. It would do me good to go back to the dear old house again and see Miss Mary and Miss Martha and Alan and Esther Green and Lee. Give my love to them all and tell them that I hope we will meet in the better world, if not in this. I would have gone back to see you all when I was working at the hospital in Nashville, but one of the neighbors told me Henry, my son, intended to shoot me if he ever got the chance. I want to know how and particularly, what the good chances you propose to give me. I am doing tolerably well here. I get paid $25 a month for victuals and clothing, have a comfortable home for Mandy. The folks here call her Mrs. Anderson. And the children, Lily and Jane and Grundy, go to school and are learning well. teacher says Grundy, his son, has a head for a preacher. They go to Sunday school, and Mandy and I attend church regularly. We are kindly treated. Sometimes we overhear others saying that other people were slaves down in Tennessee. The children feel hurt when they hear such remarks, but I tell them there was no disgrace in Tennessee that we belonged to Colonel Anderson. Many darkness. I would have been proud, as I used to was, to call you master. Now, if you will write and say what wages you will give me, I will be better able to decide whether it would be my advantage to move back to you. As to my freedom, which you say I can have, there's nothing to be gained on that score, as I got my free papers in 1864 from the Provost Marshal General of Nashville. Mandy says she would be afraid to go back without some proof that you are sincerely disposed to treat us kindly and justly, and we have concluded to test your sincerity by asking you to send us our wages for the time we served you. This will make us forget and forgive old scores and rely on your justice and friendship in the future. I served you faithfully for 32 years and Mandy for 20 years. At $25 per month for me and $2 per week for Mandy, our earnings would amount to $11,680. Add to this the interest for the time our wages were kept back, and deduct what you paid for our clothing and free doctor's visits to me and pulling a tooth for Mandy, and the balance will show what we are in justice entitled to. Please send away by Adams Express, care of you and Jesus Square, If you fail to pay us for the faithful labors in the past, we can have little faith in your promises in the future. We trust the good Maker has opened your eyes to the wrongs which you and your fathers have done to me and my fathers, in making us toil for you for generations without recompense. Here I draw my wages every Saturday night, but in Tennessee there was never any payday for the Negroes, any more than for the horses and cows. Surely there will be a day of reckoning for those who defraud the labor of his hire. In answering this letter, please state if there will be any safety for my Millie and Jane, who are now grown up and both good-looking girls. You know how it was with poor Matilda and Catherine, relatives of his who were married. I would rather stay here and starve and die, if it would come to that, than have my girls brought to shame by the violence and wickedness of their young masters. You will also please state if there has been any schools open for the colored children in your neighborhood. The great desire of my life is now to give my children an education and have them form virtuous habits. Your old servant, Gordon Anderson. P.S. Say hi to George Carter, and thank him for taking the pistol away from your machine. So you come across something like that, fascinating document in the newspaper. Did this guy ever exist? Was it an invention? How can we figure that out without going to Dayton, Ohio and going through the archives? Go to something like Ancestry.com. Yep. So put in the name Jordan Anderson. He was from Ohio, and immediately pops up, so we can, without leaving the comfort of our chair, find his grave. Yep, he was a real person from Dayton, Ohio. There's the dates of his birth and death from Tennessee. Dies in the city where he's writing from. You can find him in city directories. You can see where he lived. You can find the neighborhood that he lived in. All the students can do while sitting in class on their computers. Bringing to life this guy's story and simultaneously proving that yes, he did exist. And unlike a lot of historians who have read this document, some of them try to argue that, well, he had to have that guy who wrote this for him. There's no way he could have written this. But we can, aside from that being an obnoxious contention, we can prove that no, he was a member of the community, he was intelligent, he spoke often in the church, he was very eloquent, self-taught, autodidact, and so we can say with reasonable certainty that this is a legitimate response. We can look at, did this Colonel Anderson find his property, and find the descendants of people who lived there, find the descendants of Jordan Anderson, so if you remember stories about them. So these are the tools that we have now. 15 years was really impossible to do without a sizable research program. A couple of others. The Hemeroteca Nacional de México, for any Spanish-speaking students or who are interested in Texas history. This has millions of pages of Mexican and U.S. newspapers digitized that are free and that are searchable. My first book was a history of the introduction of boxing by largely African-American boxers who came from Texas into Mexico and Cuba, and that made that project. To be able to trace these individuals as they surface in Mexico, as they travel around. Again, 15 years ago, that would have been impossible to do. Digital Library of the Caribbean also has a lot of Texas documents, especially to the illegal slave trade to southern Texas, and a lot of Cuban documents as well. The Slave Voyages Database. So this is also free. It's created by David Eldis, a well-known historian at Emory. This is the largest single database on slave voyages. So you can have your students set the parameters. They want to see what the slave trade looked like for a 5-year period in the 1780s, or right before the Civil War. It has all the ships, how many slaves were on them, where they departed from, where they arrived, the mortality rates on ships, who was on them, whether they had a doctor or not. All of these pieces of information are aggregated. I think it's approaching 1 million voyages that are on this database. Our archive, the Slave Society's digital archive, is the largest archive of information on people of African descent in the world. We have information of approximately 6 million people in their original documentary form. This is a little bit more labor intensive because we don't have optical character recognition that can read these documents yet. The Germans are working on it, I hope they work quickly. So we rely on historians who use them to transcribe some of what they're reading, and over time we'll start to have a searchable database. But right now you just have to search by year and be able to read Spanish bibliography. So it's a little bit more difficult. National Library of Spain, same thing. Billions of pages of newspaper. So if you were teaching about the controversies that surround Abraham Lincoln in general, you might want to know, well, what do people in the rest of the world think of this? Was he as meaningful to people in France and Spain and England as he was in the United States? The answer is yes. So we read the articles that they're writing about his assassination. We can compare them and hold them up almost as blueprints of the grief that's expressed in large parts of the United States. And ask them, well, why was he so meaningful outside of the U.S.? What were the ideas that people in France or England or Mexico attached to him and his presidency? His movement for abolition. So triangulating knowledge like that, I found in my classes really engages students. Of course, we know people are saying much. World Newspaper Archive. This is a paid document. This has newspapers from Africa, newspapers from Asia, from India, from Australia. Also searchable. That one, unfortunately, is a paid site. But if you are at a public library, they might have access to it. So if we were to go to, for example, one of the topics of my first book was the African-American boxer Jack Johnson. Have you heard of him before? So he's pretty much exiled from the United States. The federal government passes a law because he was traveling openly and sleeping with white women, even though he later married 2 of them. So they passed this thing called the Mann Act, which made it illegal to transport women across state lines for immoral intent. So the woman he was dating at the time was a prostitute, and he took her from Minnesota to Illinois or something. So they arrested him, gave him a year for Leavenworth, and he skipped the country and traveled around the world boxing for the next 7 years. So following him was kind of a case study on race. How are they receiving this very flamboyant guy in Paris or Buenos Aires or Havana? So you can now trace him, and again, you could do this 15 years ago, to all of the places he went. So I had no idea when I started this. He spent a long time in Buenos Aires. I put his name in newspapers in Buenos Aires pop up. About him walking down the hall at night in a very expensive hotel, and the provincial governor comes out, he's probably never seen a black person, and Jack Johnson had gold teeth, and it's in pale light. The guy screams and says, "Holy crap, it's a devil, I'm being invaded by devilish people here." And all of these narratives sort of had no idea of this guy that explained a lot about not just him, but about race of Buenos Aires. They had a lot of slaves, had very few black people by that point for various reasons. Ancestry.com, this is another paid site, but it's a lot more than just genealogy. So I've used a lot of it to trace individuals who are traveling, so court records. So if you're looking for transnational individuals who travel quite a bit, you can find out what ships they're on, who they're traveling with, which class they're traveling. All of the census records up to 1940 on. So all of that information is digitized and available online. Library of Congress prints and images. So most of those images you can use for pretty much anything you want. If they're within copyright, they're not available for download. But the map that you saw in the first section of today, pretty sure that's on there. David Rumsey map collection. This is another map collection that has thousands and thousands of maps, most of which you can download in very good resolution. Pretty much used for anything you want nonprofit, not to publish, but to teach. National Library of Brazil, National Library of Spain, all of these have massive online presences. So pretty much any industrialized country at this point has some sort of documents available online in the last 10 years. Google Books. You use Google Books, I'm sure. So, for example, all of the parliamentary documents on the slave trade from the British are available on Google Books. You read them all and search them by key terms. An underused site is Happy Trust. So this is almost as large as Google Books, but it's more oriented toward the collections of libraries. So they digitize, for example, the entire library, entire floors of the library of UT Austin. UT Austin has the best Latin American library in the world, so for me it's an enormous tool to be able to read those books without driving 3 hours to Austin. Another tool that students have fun with, and that is also kind of a rabbit hole for me at least, is Google Ngrams. Anyone use this before? So this is available in 7 or 8 languages. I think in Russian now. You have one here. And you put in a term or a name, and it tells you the relative frequency of use of that word in all printed literature and the millions of books that they've used. Right? So one of my favorite books from graduate school was a book called The Solitary Sex: A History of Masturbation. So masturbation was originally termed onanism. So I want to see when that word was talked about prominently. Sin of Onan, spills a seed upon the ground, he's struck by a bolt of lightning and killed by God. Monty Python song. So when was that term used a lot? 1920s, obviously, around 1960, or boom in 1970. Why does that word surge? When is it replaced by masturbation? On these two. Right, so masturbation is obviously the preferred nomenclature. It was not always this. So all of these terms that you can use in the classroom, probably not onanism in the high school class, but if you wanted to use lynching, say lynching. Why would you imagine lynching spiked before 1800? That's when lynching was spiked. That's when lynching was most prevalent. If you wanted to, for example, that's actually in Spanish. To American, no, it's not in Spanish. So throughout the 19th century, this is brief for our research, one of the main ways that Latin Americans criticize the United States was by looking at our cultural practices that were prevalent. So slavery, of course, that's pretty barbaric. You try to give us lessons on civilization that you were forming enslaved. Boxing was a huge one. They said, you call yourself civilized and you have 2 human cocks and they're fighting each other. That's not very civilized. You call them bullfighting bad. What about that? It's humans, rational beings with each other. So if you look in Spanish and you say boxeo, why does it surge at this point in time? Well, it lines up perfectly with the point that boxing rises in popularity in Latin America. So in the 1920s, the first Latin American boxers became international champions, symbols of masculinity, and so the usage of that term surges over time. But that works with any phrase, any name, and like I said, we'll start using this in 3 hours later, which is not. And we'll go ahead and stop there. Those are just some terms that I was going to search on there. Another interesting one, polygenesis. Anyone heard this before? So this is the theory prominent in the 19th century that justified slavery by saying that we're different human crops by race. Black people and white people come from they're different species. So search that term. Probably English would be good. So, surprise, surprise, it peaks in the 1850s and before the Civil War as explanations for slavery and defenses of slavery were more common. Okay, any questions at this point? That was a lot of information, kind of fire hose. Any questions, any points that you stand on?
Well, are you going to be able to share some of these documents with
Yeah, we can put it all in the same box.
And this is a list that I just came up with. It's not complete. There are hundreds of sites like this. Most of which there are probably 30 different British sites that you can use to have information. Thank you very much.